Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Well, we are just coming off the National Rural Education Association's annual conference, the NFAIR conference that was just held in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I got to reconnect with Dr. Sara Hartman, who is an amazing, amazing person. And then I got to meet a new friend, Dr. Bob Klein. And Ty and I have the privilege of spending some time with them for this episode. And I am so excited about what we're going to be talking about. So Ty, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll have our guest of the hour introduce themselves.
Hi, so Ty White here, high school teacher from Wilcox, Arizona. I feel very fortunate to be in this room. I'm sure most everyone knowing at this point is aware I was the 2022 National Rural Teacher of the Year from the NREA, and I learned that came with some perks, one of which was I received a book in the mail, which is the best gift from anyone. But this book turned out to be really exciting, actually. The middle of somewhere was a collection of research profiles on developing rural education partnerships. And by the time I got to start talking to the editors of this, Dr. Hartman and Dr. Klein, it's like we knew this had to be one of our shows. So I'm really excited to have this here. This is one of my favorite perks from the year.
So let's start with you, Sara, if you would introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background, and then Bob will have you take it away from there.
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you tonight on the podcast. I'm a big admirer of the podcast, so thank you very much. I am currently, I'll start with my current position, and then maybe I'll give you just a little bit of background about who I am and what led me to this position. Currently, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Teacher Education at Ohio University. Ohio University is located in southeastern Ohio in the rural part of the state, one of the rural parts of the state. I work specifically with our early and elementary education program, where we prepare teachers to work with children from birth to fifth grade, but we specifically license for preschool to fifth grade. And I also work with many of our doctoral students here in our department. Prior to that, I had the opportunity to do some other exciting things. I started off as a classroom teacher, and I had the opportunity to work with fifth graders, sixth graders, eighth graders. One of my greatest joys will always have been being a classroom teacher. I also am the co-founder of a hands-on discovery museum for youth of all ages here in southeastern Ohio called the Ohio Valley Museum of Discovery, where I've gotten to work with children and their families of all ages, as well as educators throughout the region. Both of those things have really informed my work as a teacher educator today.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I want to go to your museum. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yes, it's been really a labor of love that began many years ago. When I started my work with the museum, somebody told us that the average time from the first kind of conversations to opening the doors of a museum like ours was 10 years. Wow. And I thought there was no way that could possibly be true, but it actually is. And so it's really been a labor of love. The museum is actually getting ready to open in a brand new space within the next few weeks. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we'll have to have you back to talk about all of the cool things that you're putting in front of kids to help them learn.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
Well, so Bob, introduce us to you and your background and tell us what you're doing currently.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Ty. It's good to be back with Sara again. I seem to never get enough of collaborating with her on all of these projects. It's big fun. So my name is Bob Klein. I come from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I was born and raised. I currently am a chair and professor of the Teaching, Learning, and Foundations Department at Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois, and spent many years, almost 18 years at Ohio University with Sara, done some regional higher education leadership, but gotten to work on some projects in rural education with Sara and others, as well as engaging in some math circle work, some collaborative partnerships with communities around schools and teachers and parents, guardians, tribal elders, especially in the Southwest. But that's also big fun, and thrilled to be here on the Rural Scoop to be with other people who care about rural spaces as much as Sara and I do.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have to dive in a little bit deeper into the circle work that you're doing if we have time. I'm excited to learn more about that as well. So we're going to start with focusing on the book that Ty received in the mail as a gift when he became the Rural Teacher of the Year for NREA. And I guess my first question really is, what motivated you to focus your efforts on this book in terms of rural education and partnerships? And how does it fill a gap that we have in the current literature? Because as you're very well aware, there's not a lot of rural out there in terms of literature and research and things that are helpful for practitioners. So why this book outside of that?
Well, Bob and I are both very committed to increasing opportunities for youth in rural places. And we both believe that partnerships, collaborations are one of the most powerful ways that happens. And so this project really stemmed from that idea and from that belief system.
And I would add that if one of the hallmarks of rural spaces is the importance of community and relationships and coming together to get things done. So frankly, if you wanted to look at a book on educational partnerships generally, there's no better place to start than rural spaces. So that was an easy win for us.
Do your personal backgrounds influence your perspective as it relates to those partnerships and their importance?
Absolutely. So as an educator, first as a classroom teacher, collaborations were always the way that you could accomplish the most for your students. But then as a doctoral student, I actually did my doctoral research about what organic collaboration in a rural school looks like. So what does collaboration look like when people are not forced to engage in it, right? When they choose to work together? And how are those collaborations developed and how are they sustained? And what I found in that research is that some really incredible things happen. And that propelled me in my future research work as a brand new assistant professor, and then has continued till today. And
for my part, I would say it's less my personal background than a personality trait. I am a notorious diehard place junkie. I love learning about new places and spaces. I love trying to understand them, their complexities. My background is such that I'm very addicted to learning about places, understanding how they work, rural places in particular. And I was very fortunate when I got to Ohio University. I had a research program based on access and equity issues in mathematics, particularly gender. And I ran into Craig and Amy Howley and got to work side by side with them on several projects and just fell in love with the work.
And I will add that you mentioned your personality being drawn to collaborative partnership work also. And that is true because as I think it was maybe within this first 6 weeks of my position as an assistant professor at Ohio University that I heard from Bob and he said, we should go get coffee because I heard there's a new rural education researcher on the block around here. And, I'd like to talk to you about, possible collaborations and things you're interested in. And, I think that's pretty powerful in terms of including people within the work that we all do.
I really enjoyed reading this. I feel terrible because I want to be promoting it more on social media, but if we have an audience out there, I want them to know this was an impactful book. I want to know what your biggest takeaway findings were. What were the things that maybe surprised you, or you really see that they could be more influential if they were implemented in rural schools and rural communities?
Let me just say there were so many things in the book here that as far as takeaways, the overwhelming takeaway for me was just how much amazing work our colleagues are doing, how varied that work is. So I'll have to do some thinking while Sara talks about specifics.
So there are just so many takeaways. One of the biggest takeaways is that this kind of work is happening in every rural context. We have chapters that represent geographic locales from all over the United States, and they're all doing really incredible, impactful work to increase access and opportunity for their rural students and communities. Looking at examples of that was just really exciting and really a privilege to be able to do as an editor. Some of the things I think are important are we saw some commonalities across these partnerships. We also saw things that were unique to each partnership, which sort of underscores that idea that no rural place is exactly the same, which I think is an important takeaway. However, there are definitely pieces within these partnerships that could be implemented in other places.
Can you dive a little bit deeper, Sara, into those commonalities? I'm interested to know what those surfaced as being.
So a lot of our partnerships talk about some challenges that exist in rural spaces and the ways that they leverage some of their assets within their communities and schools to address those challenges. For example, funding was a common challenge that we hear about. So the ways that the various entities came together to pool their resources in order to be able to accomplish the goals of the partnership was really exciting. Mm-hmm. So for example, in chapter 2, Partnership School, in that chapter, they talk about the formation of a middle school that was for the entire county where Mississippi State University is located. And that that school was to house every 6th and 7th grader in the entire county. And so hearing them talk about the way that that school was collaboratively funded was really exciting. So it was funded both through the state, through the school district, and through the university to be able to come together to provide opportunities both for the students, but also for the teacher candidates who are able to work in that school. Really an incredible example of addressing those funding challenges.
Another example I'd give is the presence of champions. Part of what happens with the emergence of these partnerships is the 2 champions, 3 champions come together, find each other, and see what they can do to recruit others, to do the asset mining that has to take place to figure out what resources everybody has to bring to the table. But the presence of a champion was kind of an underlying theme in a lot of these pieces.
And if I could add on to that, then the real effort to develop structures so that these partnerships could continue once certain key players maybe were unable to be involved in the partnership. So a real focus on sustaining the partnerships and what sustaining those partnerships would look like going forward.
I was going to say that was a trend I had noticed from section to section, was the very deliberate intentionality to be authentic in making those partnerships so you could build something like that. And in valuing and recognizing that the place itself is a part of the character and recognizing the inherent value of that.
Absolutely.
That's a great point.
So, Bob, you mentioned that one of the things that is a key element of that successful partnership is a champion. What are the other components that just need to be a part of that mix in order to be a successful partnership?
Everybody has to have some resource they can bring to the table to make this effective, and everybody needs to benefit from this. We have probably all experienced friendships, relationships that were asymmetrical. People were giving more than they were taking more than they were giving. And, that creates the kind of sustainability problems that we want to avoid. So a focus on how this can all be mutually beneficial, I think, is another key component. And people have to be able to give voice to that in really concrete terms. One of the challenges, I think, for especially the higher education side of the partnership is to climb out of your technical vocabulary, climb out of your university structures. And maybe I'm just picking on myself here because those are the structures and that's the vocabulary that I know. Maybe other people have, similar challenges as well, but to be able to meet in the middle, I mean, I know it's trite, but you got to meet in the middle in so many different ways to make that work.
And I recognize, I think you're especially talking about that chapter 4 in the VT Peers program. And I mean, they really took the time to analyze how they balance those partnerships in terms of the sort of give and take.
And I found especially in that chapter interesting that they really were willing to examine the tensions that can exist within partnerships, and that partnerships are by themselves not without challenge. I think their word is that partnerships are not a panacea for everything, right? So that's a really important point. And we do have existing research that challenges exist in rural education partnerships, that they're not always, idyllic.
And I was really pleased with our authors that they did not avoid that. They were willing to talk about all of those changing dynamics, the relationships, how, they break down, they reform, it's our authors, lots of kudos go to our authors for their honesty about the process. And that was something we really sought out in putting the book together, was a group of people who were willing to give actionable experience, not polish it too much, not leave out, the real ground level, making this thing work details.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a perfect opportunity for me to go into the next item, right? If you've listened to us, we ask our teachers, what do you think are the biggest challenges that rural schools face? So I get to ask you that now as a researcher. What specific challenges have you come across? And in what ways do you think these partnerships are one way to help tackle those?
Great question.
Well, our book is sectioned into 3 sections, but really access, advocacy, and equity are part of every chapter. So I think really that's an important component. And I don't know if you want to add on to that or speak to that, Bob.
No, only that we established those 3 sections, those 3 themes. We knew they were important, but it was all kinds of difficulty. It was days-long process trying to figure out which chapter went there, because frankly, they all kind of spoke to every part of that structure. But Ty, it's a really good question. And I think one of the things that Sara and I have been careful to do is to honor the voices of teachers in rural schools and parents and folks in rural communities, to listen to what they say is important, and to hope that in our work we've captured some of that. So I could speak a little bit to the communities I've worked with, but only as an outsider. So it's a hard question for me to answer with anything less than humility.
One thing I think you will notice, though, is that first section that's about teachers and teacher candidates has 4 chapters. And we could have included more in that section, because one of the biggest issues facing rural schools is preparing, recruiting, and retaining teachers in rural schools. And it's impacting the shape and the look of teacher preparation across the United States. And we could talk a lot about that, but there are chapters in the book that are specifically attentive to what those concerns are.
I get the sense that rural teachers, administrators, staff members, they need I don't know what to call it, maybe a mini hats support group, because nowhere are you going to find people wearing so many hats as a teacher, a bus driver, I see you shaking your head. It's absolutely the case that people are doing so much. But on the flip side of that, it also means that those folks have so much to offer in terms of building solutions that are appropriate to the places in which they live and work, and to the students they work with.
So to continue speaking to those challenges, it's not just, it is related to bringing teachers in, preparing teachers to teach in rural contexts, but then it's about the children and the families who live in rural communities, and how do we get access to opportunities and access to services? So for example, Chapter 9 is about partnerships that bring services and resources and supports to children with low sensory disabilities. So it's about things like that. And I think those are examples of the challenges that rural schools are experiencing in supporting all children and all families. Chapter 8, which I'm a co-author on, is about bringing learning opportunities to children in rural settings. And those are things that I think everyone who is working in a rural context, everyone is grappling with, and everyone is trying to bring those opportunities and to look for ways to partner in order to increase access to those opportunities.
I thought you were going to mention Chapter 10, Sarah, where the example of bringing legal advocates and policy experts to help with issues of access to, from immigrant families, non-native speakers of English, to be able to, access the kinds of supports that they need within a community. It's one of my, that's Amy Walker's chapter, La Voz Unida. It's one of my favorites.
Yes, absolutely. And that one talks about developing a municipal ID program that increased know your rights advocacy and access for people who do not have a driver's license. So to be able to attend school events and other things like that. It's also a very powerful chapter that speaks to those challenges that you asked us about, Ty.
So can we dive a little bit further into that and just talk a little bit more about what does your research and the stories that you collected and shared inform as far as policies and changes in policies that might support rural education more completely, more inclusively, more equitably?
That's also a good segue to our most recent collaboration together, which is the Why Rural Matters report, centering equity and opportunity, because one of those issues is funding disparities and also pay disparities within rural spaces, and all of those things that influence policy.
And funding has been a decade and decade old issue, and my sense is that the attempts to address it by policy at federal and state levels are applying a patch to a patch to a patch, a Band-Aid, that we haven't thought seriously about what it takes to educate a child, to support a professional teacher, to address issues of school location and transportation. And Sarah's right. Those issues come out and I think are crystallized really well in the Why Rural Matters report that we did with Karen Epley, Daniel Showalter, and Jerry Johnson. We are also, I think, victim to making a decision or a policy decision and then not revisiting it, not asking, did we do okay? Is this working? Do we need to revise it? I would point to some of the, I can't speak to all of them, but some of the school consolidation efforts that rose in the 60s and 70s, and we're still seeing, and you can look in our report and see some of the lingering impacts of those in terms of, say, the expenditures of transportation dollars to instructional dollars. Those are particularly high. There's a high burden on transportation costs in states that have significant numbers of school consolidations, large schools far away from where kids are. And that's a very, very wonky way of, not even addressing the fact that kids are spending, a great many minutes and hours on a school bus each day. So I think the policy concerns are absolutely vital. I think that perhaps, Sara, you want to speak to this as well, but in the work I've done simply on in service to the states I've been working in, when you go to collaborate with teachers and parent-teacher organizations and NEA and AFT teacher groups and so forth, those meetings are always in central metropolitan spaces. They are, almost always focused on language that is particular to those places, and it makes it very, very hard to make sure that you are including the kinds of voices you need to include. And ultimately, and when you look at even at the root of, I'm a big etymology fan, even the root of the word policy, you're talking about the place, the people, the collection. And so it's not acceptable to have, one, two voices make the decision, because they too often are cosmopolitan voices. I was on a performance assessment group in a state at one point, and there was a question about condominiums. And I shook my head. I said, I don't think folks near us are going to really understand that. So I quickly texted a couple of our middle school teachers in Southeast Ohio and said, can you just ask your class you're in right now, have them raise their hand if they know what a condominium is? And they were sending back the most hysterical answers. I'm not sure what it is, but I think my uncle has one. I think that's where people in Florida live, and other more colorful answers I won't share with your podcast. But, I think it went to say, it was the kind of evidence that the structures we create sometimes are blind to the spaces that we need to support. And we're talking about almost 10 million rural students in the United States. So this is not a catering to a small group. This is a significant group, and I think it drives a lot of the work that Sara and I do, and you as well.
Well, and if I can, in relation to this policy question, as you said, Bob, so many of these decisions are made without considering the rural context and the impact of the rural context. And a lot of our chapters really do speak to that. And a lot of them are developing partnerships to address inequities in policies that manifest themselves in rural settings. And it makes me think about, and please forgive me, I'm not going to remember her last name right now, but previously on your podcast, Alyssa, and I think she is a teacher in South Dakota.
South Dakota, yes.
And she is a music educator, and she talked about, while trying to raise the funds to be able to take music education students to various instrumental opportunities, they experience a much decreased access to funding just in their local community, simply because there are only so many businesses and so many entities who they can ask to help fund them. That is the kind of thing that is not being considered on a state and federal level when we talk about rural education.
And my concern is the way that trickles down to students, their perceptions of themselves, where they come from. The very title of the book, The Middle of Somewhere, strikes at the heart of something that drives, the opposite phrase that drives Sara and I nuts. That we really want to emphasize the value of where I come from. We interviewed in a study that I was part of. We interviewed some math students in a rural place in the Great Plains. And we asked them, where is math? And they said, oh yeah, math is everywhere. So, well, that's great. Where is it here? And, the student gave us some examples that were some kind of checkbook balance examples. I said, what about, the math you're taking? Well, actually, forget about the math you're taking. What about calculus? And emphatically, this high school kid shook his head, said, oh, no, you got to go to a big city to find calculus. And it's a striking story in some ways, but especially because this student very acutely saw the opportunities that he had, and it was likely a reflection of what was available to him that came from the funding that was available to fund those opportunities. I mean, so it's a thread that goes deep as far as the impacts. So we are both very aware of the need to address policy as a major issue.
Have policymakers been receptive to your recommendations? And Do you have any examples of where policy might have changed as a result of what you're putting out into the public space?
I think chapter 10 is a great example of that. In chapter 10, in creation of that municipal ID program, the person in charge of that program said, unless I, receive a groundswell of support for this, I don't think that I can move forward with it. And the example in that chapter is that the partnership made it happen, and the partnership brought together that support. And I think that's a really great example of how a collective effort can make a difference. In terms of us personally, we're excited to have opportunities like this to talk about the impact of the book and hope that the book, will be able to impact others. I think the Why Rural Matters report is another really important resource that individuals can use within their own states and their own communities to advocate for the things that are needed for their rural schools. And I hope that report will be used in many different ways to accomplish that.
Yeah, and part of what's helping in that effort is that the report, given the generous sponsorship of the National Rural Education Association and the Rural Schools Collaborative, we now have something we've never had before with the Why Rural Matters reports. We have a toolkit that includes everything you need to use this report, PowerPoints, logos, other resources, a data dashboard, things that we've never had before that we hope allow more people to do more with the information that we've presented. And we really look at that report as offering up a view of the data and how they speak to the state of rural education in the United States. And our hope is that others will have the kinds of successes, and we've heard that in the past, but have those successes with what we're presenting in the Why Rural Matters report.
So, these have been some exciting things to share and some new things to think about. But I want to ask you, what do you think the future of rural education looks like? And where's that headed? How do we get there?
I think the future of rural education is exciting. I think that the conference that we all got to attend together last week was inspiring, and it shows how much innovation and effort and engagement in rural education exists right now. I think it's a thrilling time to be involved in rural education, and I'm excited about the future. And I'm hopeful about the continued advocacy in rural education settings.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the other thing I would add is that, we're seeing rural spaces become more racially, linguistically diverse. We are seeing, rural spaces, rural communities transformed by technology, by remote work opportunities. People get to choose where they live based on where they want to live versus where they have to work in some cases. That has a complex set of impacts on rural communities. It's, neither good nor bad in any, singular way. But, we're watching those communities, we're watching rural places, rural schools as they respond to this, changing that's taking place. And I agree with Sara. It is exciting. And, nobody has the answers to what it's going to look like or how we're going to make it look like that. But I think my answer, Ty, would be that, you go back to the strong relationships, you make sure those the community relationships are in place. One of the things that I thought was absolutely fabulous about the National Rural Education Association conference was I've rarely been to conferences that have people coming from so many different sectors, from K-12 schools, from superintendencies, from local education associations, from higher education associations, from nonprofit organizations. It's not just that there's a lot of interest in rural spaces, it's that there's interest from people who have different things to bring to the table. And I think that's a real strength that's going to bring that bright future about that Sara talks about.
I want to narrow that a little bit just because, I'm sure that this is my hope. It goes back to, I think, what you were saying about valuing the place, even in subjects like teaching math. What do you think it's going to take to better prepare teachers and to better prepare schools to recognize using that value, that inherent value of place in the way we prepare our kids for whatever comes?
That is a multifaceted answer, I think. And I want to
That's
talk.
$1 million question. Yeah, that's great.
I want to talk just a little bit because as excited as I am, I do want to offer a little bit of warning because we as rural education advocates are still dealing with a lot of rural stereotypes that exist in really mainstream and popular media. And that is extremely problematic. It's problematic not just in teacher preparation, but it's problematic in recruiting teachers. And it's also problematic for what it tells children about their communities and their schools. And I think that all contributes to what you were talking about, Ty.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. In the work I do, I experience this tension between wanting to, and I'm speaking specifically about working within Indigenous communities, doing math activities, bringing mathematicians from all over the United States to work on problems with kids. Part of the effort there is to help students connect to opportunities, be they post-secondary opportunities or usually post-secondary opportunities, but what can I do? Where can this take me? But the tension exists between I want to open those doors. I want to make sure that those possibilities are there, that you're aware of them. But I also want you to value your identity of who you are, where you come from, and what you can offer the communities that you grew up in or that you're coming from. So there's, this is well documented in the literature, the message that gets communicated that opportunities are elsewhere. You have to leave to find, go to a big city to find calculus in that example earlier, but recognizing that to support our communities, we've got to have that talent retained. We have to have it come back. We have to, keep that talent connected in some meaningful ways.
Such a good point, especially knowing that there's an economic development component to that as well. And so that's a big, big concern for a rural community that's trying to make sure that they're viable.
Yeah, actually, and that is something that came through in the book as well. So chapter 1 and chapter 6 both speak to that piece.
So what advice would you give to rural educators or rural administrators that are looking to form those partnerships that are so vital in their schools?
I would encourage them to look for people who are willing to be boundary spanners, for people who are willing to collaborate and who want to collaborate, who don't want to stay in their silo, who are willing to get engaged at all levels.
Yeah, I draw on Sarah's earlier example. I'm a big fan of invite somebody out for coffee, do a lot of listening, put the phone in your pocket, take a risk. I think sometimes, it's easy to talk about getting out of silos, but, silos are comfortable. We're surrounded by the known. Breaking out and having that coffee and starting the conversation. Sarah's example earlier of, the 10 years that it takes to create the Ohio Valley Museum of Discovery. You got to persist. That takes some staying power. So you got to invest for the long haul. The other thing we saw in the book is the importance of commitment, long term, expecting that you're building something not for the now, but for the soon to be and the time thereafter. And I think that's one of the pieces of advice I would give is, have those conversations now, be patient with yourself, be patient with others. Sometimes you find solutions in the strangest of places. However broad you can make your call for collaboration and partnership, make it as broad as possible.
So one of the questions that Ty and I always ask is, what does the term rural advantage mean to you? Because we get a lot of really great answers. So I'm curious, Sara and Bob, what is the rural advantage?
To me, the rural advantage is connection. And it is the joy that is found in connection. and the reaching out to others and the bringing people together and the creating of those networks, the creating of learning ecosystems that benefit many people across many different layers of a community.
Well said.
I think the rural advantage is several tens of thousands of years. We've been doing rural a heck of a lot longer than we've been doing municipal, and rural has a staying power because rural is necessary, rural is important. Rural continues to be a vital part of who we are in the United States and around the world. That history is something to be proud of. And that history is a necessary history. It's going to be necessary for years to come.
That's a good point, Bob. Is there anything that we have not touched on that you want to highlight either about the book or about the Why Rural Matters report?
I'd like to just highlight one more time the title of our book, which is The Middle of Somewhere, Rural Education Partnerships and Innovation. And we chose that title because we truly believe that the children who are growing up in rural areas in the United States deserve to believe that their homes, their schools, and their communities are somewhere, despite what others may tell them or despite what the media may show them.
I got nothing to add. That's great.
Mic drop.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both for spending some time with us talking about your book and talking about the report. And we look forward to seeing what happens next. Please feel free to come back and keep us posted on how things are progressing with your research and with your current day jobs as well, with the museum and with your circle work. That's fantastic. So
this was fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. And thank you for all that you do to put the word out there about rural education and the incredible guests that you invite to your podcast.
Well, present company definitely included.
Very honored. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to The Rural Scoop. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. And be sure to follow on Twitter at Dr. Sadorf. That's Dr_SADORF, so that you never miss a new release. You can also check out previous episodes of The Scoop wherever you get your podcasts. Production support for The Rural Scoop is provided by Chattanooga Podcast Studios. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education.